Hello YouTube, this is umilzo3. In the previous video, we introduced the concept of variables, and we said basically we can assign a value to a variable, and then we can use that variable in the execution of our program. For example, if we go ahead and come up to the top of this code and we see something like a equals 400, and then we say print of a plus 12, it's able to basically refer to the value of a in this computation, and we would be able to see that 400 plus 12 is indeed 412, and that's what we see here. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be continuing our discussion of variables in this video. This is the first video where I'm not going to be basically reviewing all the content from the beginning of the curriculum. So basically at this point, hopefully you understand about printing statements, and then we also have talked about comments, and then also we understand about arithmetic expressions, and then we understand implicit casting from int to float, and we kind of understand the concept of that. So for integer expression, which we're talking about plus, minus, times, divided by, integer divided by, modular arithmetic, and exponential. Okay, and so hopefully you're familiar with those. And then we could also have, we could also be talking about escape sequences, and that kind of tied in with that is delimiters. So escape sequences I usually think of as the new line and the new tab. Delimiters is basically when you have the quote conflict, right? And so if you start and end, remember, if you start and end a string with single quotes and you want to print single quotes, you need to put a backslash before those single quotes. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Hopefully that's clear. And then we've also talked about, obviously how you can printing a string of multiple lines by using 3 double quotations. And then we said just literally in your code, you could just have those words of your string, right? And then you would just close it up with the 3 double quotations at the end, and then you'd be set, right? And then the end parentheses, and you're all good to go. And then what we're going to do though, is we said that we can concatenate strings, and also we can basically multiply strings for multiple concatenation. So remember, if you do 5 times sup, it would print sup, 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 sup. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. And then we also said that you could do the string times the int, okay, but you cannot do it with the float. It has to be a string times an int, or an int times a string, and then it prints string int many times. So hopefully that's clear to you. And then so I guess now I can't really think of too many other things we've talked about so far. I'm trying to look back at the curriculum here, but essentially what we're going to also be talking about, here is variables, right? And so we started to talk about variables and also data type conversions. And so these were essentially the things from lesson 4. And so from now we'll talk a little bit more about variables. We would talk about reassigning variables, incrementing and decrementing. And then in this video, I also want to talk about user input. Basically, this is the idea that we do not have to have constant console output. We can seek user input. Okay, so we can basically, if we're interacting with a program, we can basically have the output of the code be a function of what the user enters, and we can ask the user questions. Sort of like if you had a doctor's appointment, you went into the doctor's office and there's a kiosk there, and you go ahead and go up to the kiosk, and it doesn't just say, hey, welcome, sit down, but it says, hey, what is your name? And then you enter in your name, and then it says, what is your date of birth, or what's your appointment time, or something like that, or which doctor are you going to meet? And then you can click that, and then and then in the system in the back, it tries to find a match, and then if there's a match, it'll notify that doctor, and they'll say, hey, your client is here, so go ahead and let them in for their appointment. So that's an example of user input, right? It's interacting with the person, and we want our programs to be dynamic, and we want them to be interactive with the user. And so we're going to be talking about collecting user input and how we do that. It's very, very simple to do that in Python. And we talked in Java, there was a lesson, I think it was 18 or 19, about a scanner class. And we said that we need to import the scanner class and create an instance of it in order to ask for user input. In Python, it's very, very easy. We write about 1 word, and that'll allow us to ask for user input. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to be not reviewing so much of this stuff. So, these things were kind of talked about in lessons 1 through 3, printing statements up to concatenating strings, multiplying them. How do we do that, and what does that mean? let's talk about variables. Remember that we said that we can go ahead and have variables of particular values. And so if we have x equals 100 and y equals 22, and then we go ahead and try to print of x times y, this created two variables, and then it referenced both of their values. And so we're clear on that. I think we already were talking about that earlier in this video. So that's where we get the 400. Okay, so, but anyway, that's actually, let's just remove that. But anyway, that's what we would get here. So that would be 2200, right? And then we can go ahead and create more variables, right? And then we can also have float variables. So what if we said t equals 3.6? What if we said z equals t plus 2? And then what if we said print of z? So z would take t's value and add 2 to it to get 5.6, and then that's the float that would be printed. Okay, so t is an example of a float variable, obviously. And then z will be an example of a float variable because we said that Python implicitly casts this int 2 to a float. So therefore you'd be dealing with the 5.6. And then we also talked about string variables. And so we also said something like you could have something like August, and then you could have something like, how about F equals February, right? And so then if you went ahead and printed, like, what if you say print of A, and then you concatenate it with a single quoted string, which is totally fine, and then you have an F, and then you can go ahead and run that, and indeed those are what's concatenated. So you would just say August and February. And so those are examples of string variables, and you can basically combine variables, and you can take a look at different things here. What you cannot do is combine data types. You cannot combine data types. So basically you cannot say print of August plus 2. And so this would be an issue right here, right? Because in Java, we talked in lesson 7 in the curriculum, if you go look at my YouTube videos on that playlist, about how not only does Java prefer doubles over ints, which is also true of Python, but Java prefers strings over doubles. And so basically Java is able to do that conversion. And so it would just represent an integer double as a string if it was being concatenated with a string. Python doesn't do that. So Python says you can't combine an int with a string. So what we need to do is we need to change the data type of one of these values. So what we said in the last video is we could say something like int of x, right? And so if we say something like a equals 5, and then what if we say b equals float of a, okay? And then what we could do is c equals string of a, okay? And then we can go ahead and try these things out. So then what if we say b times b? So this would do 5.0 times 5.0 to get 25.0. What if we said c plus concatenated with cookies? This would not be a problem because now we're just concatenated two strings together to get 5 cookies. So that's no problem. And you can see how these data type conversions would allow you to do things that you normally otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So that's kind of what we have going on with that, right? And then you can also go the other way. So if you have 577 and you want to get a number out of it, you could say float. What if you said float of a, right? So 577, that looks like an int. But what's going to happen, what's going to come out, you can probably guess. So it's going to be 577.0. And now that it's in numerical form, you could go ahead and do things like subtract 2 from it to get 575.0. So hopefully that's clear to you. Hopefully it's clear how the data types can kind of combine with one another and how we can basically move around between them. What we're going to be saying in this video is that you can reassign values of variables. So if you say basically, let's say a equals 5, b equals 2, and then we're going to say b equals 4, and then print of a plus b. So this would print 9, not 7, because b was redefined. Okay, so that's basically what's going to happen here. And then if you run the code, that would print 9. So basically, we can reassign the value of a variable after it has been created. And better yet, we can reassign the value according to or depending on or referencing its original or previous values. So let me show you what I mean by that. If you saw something in algebra where you said something is equal, let's say something is equal, like w is equal to 20, and then you said w is equal to w plus 2. If you saw this equation in math, w equals w plus 2, we know that there's no solutions to that equation. There's not even any complex numbers where you could add 2 to the number and get the exact same number back. It doesn't happen. But what this does is basically it's a reassignment of w from its original value to 2 plus, to its original value plus 2. So what it's doing is it's referencing W's original value in the computation of its new value, and that's no problem whatsoever. So then if we go ahead and say print of W, then we would be able to go ahead and reference that. And we could be a little bit fancier here, and we could go ahead and print W equals with its value. The only thing we would have to do is convert it to a string. So hopefully these data type conversions are starting to make sense to you. So now if we say W equals with string of W, we would be able to print W equals 22 because W was reassigned according to its original value plus 2. And then we went ahead and we did a conversion of W to its string form. Okay, and then we can do W equals. But you have to remember that this string of W is only locally. So this only converts W to a string, for this command. It doesn't change W. Okay, so now if you go ahead and say W plus 5, then you would be able to compute that, right? And so at that point it would be 27, right? But then if you try, W is not a string anymore. So now if you go down here and you say W equals and then the value of W, it's still going to have an issue with that. Okay, so if you say string of W, if you want W to actually change its own data type, what would you do? You would basically say W equals string of W, okay? And now what you've done here is you reassignment of W from its int form to its string form. So now if you say W equals and then concatenate it with W, now you're able to do that, okay? What if you want to change the value of W again? Now you have to bring it back into its int form. So now you could say W equals int of W, and you could change the value again. What if you want to double it? What you could do is you could say W equals W times 2. So this doubles the value of W, okay? No pun intended there. So W equals W times 2. So we're doubling W, all right? And then what you could do is you could go ahead and convert it back to a string, and you could print the new value of W. So now instead of just seeing W equals 22, we would expect to see W equals 24 or 44, right? I can do math. But if you don't want to do all these data type conversions, if you just want to keep W as an int, then just basically concatenate it locally, or you can go ahead and assign another variable when you need to use it, right? But a variable would not adjust dynamically, okay? So if you say y equals string of W here, and then you go ahead and say W equals, and then whatever string of W is, which is, whatever y is, which is string of W, that's fine. But then if you go ahead and try to do y down here, the problem is that y is still going to be accessing string of the original W value, okay? So hopefully you understand what's going on here. And I guess we don't need this line anymore, okay? So basically this line, in the current code, this line is unnecessary because we keep W as an int. So I'm just basically showing you an example with these different data types and just showing you that you can reassign the value of a variable according to the old value, right? So this one, what does it do? So what does this code do? So W equals 20 reassigns W to 22 according to W's original value, which I'm saying is totally fine, right? And then it basically makes a string object out of the current value of W. So Y is equal to 22. And then it can print W equals 22 because Y is 22, right? So it's combining the two string objects. And W equals int of W, that doesn't do anything because W is still an int. Remember, we originally converted W to its string form, but then we decided to change the code and just create a separate variable as the string representation of W. So W equals int of W doesn't change anything, but then we go ahead and multiply the current value of W by 2. And then we say W equals string of W, okay? But this code is unnecessary too. And then if you go ahead and print W with Y, it's still referencing the original value of W. But hopefully that gives you a sense of what's going on here. We only have about 5.5 minutes to talk about user input. If you want to ask a question to a user, what you can do is basically just say input, okay? So you can basically just say something like, can you print something? And then what you would do is you would basically go ahead and assign whatever they say to a variable. So you could say something like x equals input or something like that. So the way that the input method works is it allows you to ask for user input Okay, so now it's just going to say, can you print something? And then it's going to assign the value of X to whatever the result is. So say if you call input with empty parentheses, this is basically, you can call input function in Python to ask for user input during the run of the program. And so hopefully that's clear to you. And then we can go ahead and we can print something, right? So we can print, hey, okay. And then that would be the end of the code. So we actually didn't end up doing anything with X. And so what we could do is we could say, thanks for telling me. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a delimiter for a double quote. And then what we're going to do is we're going to concatenate whatever their response was with another double quote. Okay, and then we're going to end that string. So what does this code do? It's going to say, can you print something? And then basically it's going to create a variable where where the value of the variable cannot be assigned. This program cannot continue running until the user provides a value. So then the programmer is going to provide a value which is assigned to X. And then what happens is we're going to print a string, and that string is going to be thanks for telling me, and then double quotes, and then whatever I entered, whatever the programmer entered, and then double quotes. Okay, and then that's going to be it. And so hopefully you understand how that works. And then if we go ahead and run it, we can see, can you print something? And then we can say yes, and then it says thanks for telling me yes in double quotes. So hopefully you understand this is basically how you call user input, that you call the input function, and then your program literally stops running at this equal sign, because you can't run thanks for telling me until X takes a value, and X taking a value depends on the programmer. The programmer has to do that. So this is an example of asking for user input. There's one other thing I wanted to say. What this code does is it just prints a constant string. So it just says, can you print something? And then basically what we did was we entered our response on the next line, because we said that the way print works is it prints that statement, right? And then that's it for that line. It would just go on to the next line. But what if we wanted to basically have a little bit more of a question and answer? If we put a string input into the input function, it'll basically be more in the form of a question. So what we do is we say basically X equals input, basically accepts user input, but the user enters the input on a new line. So it's not really a question, not really a question. I mean, they can read the output of the code that came before that, but it's not really like directly asking a question. But if you say input of where are you, then this would accept user input, prompting them to answer that question. So what we're going to do is, instead of saying print of can you print something, we're going to take this string and we're going to basically remove this print statement, where we're going to put the string into the argument for the input function. Okay, and so now it's going to give us a Python enhancement proposal annoying thing here that says your line comment is way too long. So that's just a suggestion, but let's ignore that. And now it says, can you print something? And now I'm entering on the same line. So now if I go ahead and say, can you print something? And then it says, thanks for telling me yes. Okay, and then you can do the same thing with math. Okay, so what if you wanted to add two numbers together? You could say something like A equals input of give me a number, right? And then I could enter a number, and then B equals input of give me another number, right? And then you could add this, you could basically form a sum out of that. So you could say int of A plus int of B, because what I haven't said yet is that the input function always returns a string. So if you ask for a number, the number is still going to come out as a string. So what you would need to do, you could create a third variable, which is going to be an integer, and it's going to be a sum of the integer forms of the two numbers, the two inputs that the programmer entered. And so what now you could do is, now you could say print of the sum is, and then the string representation of C, because we said that we cannot combine a string with an int, okay? And we had to do int of A plus int of B, because we're saying that this input method always returns a string, even if the user entered a number. So this is gonna ask for two inputs at a time. So now we're gonna run this code, so yes, and it waits for that. and then it runs this line, and now we have to do two more things. So now we would say 22 and 10, and then it's able to add those two numbers after converting them to their int forms, adding them together, and then converting that result back to its string representation so that it can be concatenated with these three words. So that's an example of reassigning variables and also working with user input. We can review that a little bit more in the next video, but that's enough for now. From UMills03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.